All right, so I'm going to go over quite a few things just in relation to ZBrush for printing. So not a lot of sculpture stuff. I know you guys may have watched the Sculpt Off, and there's a lot of sculptures. Odell's up there right now just destroying the screen over there on the right. So if you guys haven't seen that, just watch it. We also had all these prints done. There was a Sculpt Off yesterday that happened. Hour and a half. All the guys sculpted those models right over there, and they're being judged right now. So yesterday it was an hour and a half sculpt from nothing. And we just gave them restrictions. They had to sculpt in a 6x3 box. That was the only restriction they had. And then they had to do it Alien and Beyond. And so an hour and a half, start to finish, with color and texture, all done in ZBrush. And then we exported out of ZBrush straight to a printer at 3DRP. They also have a booth way over there. They put them all on a bed last night and printed them all and then dropped them off today. And so they're all over there, all the prints. Right behind here, these guys right here. There's all the prints right there that were done, made yesterday, printed last night, and they're up on the show floor today. So extremely fast process with this piece of software and 3D printing as a technology. So I'm going to first just go over some kind of cool things that I use inside of ZBrush. This is a little fish girl model. I actually made her for another convention that was actually in this ballroom for CTN. Now this little fish girl here, I sent her, she was done entirely inside of ZBrush, and I sent her to Shapeways to get printed. And so I set up all her little keys and everything inside of ZBrush, did all the hollowing inside of ZBrush, and sent her to Shapeways. And she came back in this nice kind of little format here. Now I cut her up into a lot of parts, and this was kind of illustrate that you're not restricted to how many parts you can make. You can just keep cutting models up, and they'll still print. This also gives you the ability, if you have, say, a printer with a small build volume, you can slice your model up into various parts, and then you can get a much larger print out of that printer. So if you're concerned about, well, if I get this printer, I'm only going to be able to print something this big. Well, think about slicing it up. And then you can print out all these separately and get a much larger model. So it's things there. So here we have Fish Girl. She was done entirely in ZBrush, and this was just with traditional sculpting and a feature called Dynamesh. Dynamesh, the main principle of this, I'll just show you guys here quick, is that you have a volume, and when you start moving stuff normally in any other package, you're going to start to get the polygon flow of the model is going to distort. And when you get this distortion, when you actually go to sculpt or do anything with this model, you're going to notice a difference. So you can notice how clean it is right here, and then as soon as I start going along this topology, it's all rough and nasty, right? So this isn't going to give me any clean sculpt. So if I want to do a straight line, it's going to be okay down here, but up here it's going to be all a mess. So that's not what you want when you're actually sculpting or doing stuff. That you want stuff clean all over the surface. Well, with Dynamesh, it has this option here. You just come to the Geometry tab and then go to Dynamesh here. And you set a resolution. This is based on the scale of your object. So right now, if I do a resolution of 512 and then hit Dynamesh, it's going to go through the model, and it's going to generate even topology across the entire surface of the model. And so with this right here, if I sculpt on it now, you can see it's going really nice all the way through there. And this is a dynamic process, so I can now just keep pulling forms and shapes out of the model. And where you would start to get stretching, so say things like this through here, I can now re-Dynamesh with just a single click off the model, and it's going to give me new topology, and then I come in and smooth it. So it's becoming, this feature here is digital clay. So think about how you sculpt stuff with clay if you do anything traditionally. And you want to add more volume to it, you just take more clay and slap it on, and then you continue sculpting. So with Dynamesh, you just make your volume what you want it, re-Dynamesh, continue sculpting. Change it, re-Dynamesh, continue sculpting. So it's an extremely fast workflow to kind of get your model sculpting in a non-traditional kind of way. You're not moving vertices, you're not pushing points, you're sculpting. So very traditional workflow. So here I have a fish girl here. Now, if you can see on this model, actually you can pull up this one, she has these goggles. Right? And so normally, if I wanted to make goggles, how would you make goggles? Well, you could take it to your other 3D package. You could do some splines and then do some extrusions and things like that. But it's another package you have to have, and it's also kind of tedious. It's not very artistic. It's more, constructive, technical. And so ZBrush allows you to do this stuff easily and really fast without having all those kind of splines. So I'm going to generate these goggles without any spline usage. I'm actually going to open up Lightbox here. I'm going to see if I can find these alphas. And I have this black and white alpha made. This is simply just a black and white texture that's just a line in the shape of a goggle. And I'm just going to hold Shift here and just load that in. So I just have it over here inside ZBrush. So now it's loaded inside of ZBrush. So now if I come over here, and I'm going to go to the subtool palette here, and this, I'm going to go through this quick because I have a whole bunch of stuff to show. So if you have additional questions, come back around by the end, and I'll be happy to answer them. There's also a lot of videos I can point you to or direct you to for more information on all these processes inside the tool. But right now I'm just going to quickly append another polygon, another polygonal object into the scene. So I'm just going to do an insert, and then insert a polymesh 3D object. Now this object was imported in, and it's kind of out of space here. So I'm going to just turn it out of perspective, and then there's these transpose tools, and I can just quickly draw this out here. Oops, I lost my little fish girl head. I'm just going to move this into position roughly around where her face is, so something like this. And ZBrush now has this option called Shadow Box. Now over here, I'm going to set this resolution to 256, and then I'm going to hit Shadow Box. Now Shadow Box is another tool inside of ZBrush that's extremely powerful for making shapes, forms, anything you want. And it works based on masking. So here I have it's just a box that's kind of been inverted. And if I take my pen and hold Control and draw a mask, it's going to generate a shape based on that mask. So if I mask here, it's going to give me a shape. Mask here, it's going to give me a shape. This is a quick way to build structure with just black and white. So if you need to make I can come to the Control Mask Pen, go to a drag rectangle, and grab that alpha I came in. I'm going to set this to square, and I can drag these goggles out, right? And this is just a black and white texture that I made. And now if I release that, I have geometry right there. I have those goggles made in a second, extremely fast. Now once you have these made, you just need to get out of Shadow Box again, and you now have a tangible object inside of ZBrush. Now this right now it came back pretty much as a Dynameshed object, so you could now sculpt on these goggles just with any of the sculpting brushes inside of ZBrush, and you get something like this. You can also use these options in topology that will allow you to mirror and weld and do things like this very fast. So right now this may not be symmetrical based on my scene, so I can quickly hit mirror and weld, and it's going to actually give me a symmetry. It's going to take one side and flip it all the way over to the other side. And this does it in a clean way, so it's keeping all this nice tessellation. So you can model half of your model and flip it, model half of it and flip it. Kind of like you can do in other things, but it's really nice because you can do all this kind of advanced sculpting in ZBrush on one side and flip it, and it's fast, super fast. So I'm going to turn my fish girl back on here, find her head. They're a little bit big, so I'm going to scale these down, and then just move them into position really quick. I lost her there. There we go. She's really close now. So now, right now, these goggles, I could possibly print them like this. There would be this overhang, depending on what printer I was using. If I was using an SLA, it'd probably come out okay. If I was using a MakerBot, I'm going to have all these support structures now, depending on how I have her angled. And right now, I kind of want to take this and move it back into her face here, so it's actually flush with her face, and also generate it as a watertight mesh so that I can just print it out. So to do this, I'm just going to quickly take this shape here. And first, it's kind of dense right now, so I could come in and I could mask part of this and then use a move brush and just take that edge and move it back. And that would give me this goggle shape. And you can see I didn't have symmetry on, so it didn't get this other side, but I can use now that mirror and weld function, and now I have that goggle on both sides. And I can now move these in. Let me turn symmetry on here. Into her face. Just bumping it right into the structure of her form there. So I kind of want to fuse it into the surface of the model, because I need that watertight kind of support structure. I'm distorting the outer edge here, so I'm going to mask this. Kind of pull these into the shape here. So I'm just looking for those holes and sealing them up. So there we go. But now I have this in two parts. It's not in one single mesh. And also her face right now, if you noticed, was also a separate subtool. So all these parts right now are individual. They're not welded together. Well, I want this one piece, right? I want her face and all her goggles to be one piece. So I want one watertight element for that entire part. And this is where that Dynamesh process comes in again to help you in your sculpt. So I'm going to come first and do a merge visible, which is going to take everything I have visible on the screen and turn it into one subtool. So let's go over here and merge visible. And when this does this, it's non-destructive to your original piece. It actually is just creating a new tool up here, so I can now append that into the scene. And if I come all the way down the bottom here, it's going to be sitting here. And so now I have this merged together. But this isn't solidified yet. It's not fully watertight. Those goggles have that back face that wasn't fully solid. So it still may have a hole or something around the edge. So I want to make sure it's watertight. So I'm going to just re-Dynamesh this entire mesh now. And so if I come to the Dynamesh tab here, actually we'll show you this first. So if I cut this off here, you can see I have the goggles interpenetrating. Now if you print this on a MakerBot, it's going to actually carve the goggles out of her face, right? So you don't want that. So we need to make it, a shell pretty much the whole surface. So when we print it, it's not going to, I think it's a subtractive object in the MakerBot, and then we want it as two parts. So we need to watertight the structure. So I'm going to come over here to the Dynamesh tab. I'm a semi-resolution somewhere around a 512. I'm not sure what the exact one is for her. And then I'm just going to Dynamesh. And now she is Dynameshed. Now if I would have upped this resolution, these little kind of artifacts I'm seeing here would have been resolved or gone away. I can also project my original one back onto it to remove these. But for the demo here, I'm just going to leave this right now. And now I'm going to show you guys that if I hide this back here, you can see it's now fully solid. So it's solidified that entire model. And that was all in a few clicks. So nothing complex, extremely fast way to work. This is now still that nice even topology. So if I want to modify or edit anything on the model, like if I want to do some sculpting through here, I can come in and quickly sculpt on the model. So really quick way to kind of get your objects all together. There's also a subtraction feature on this as well. So if I want to punch a hole out on the bottom of her base right here, there's a few brushes that are already pre-made inside ZBrush called insert mesh brushes. So I can just get this insert cube. I can start drawing this out on the model, and by default, it's just going to add cubes wherever I draw. But if I undo, back to this, and I draw while holding Alt, it gives you this kind of effect. And it's going to give me this cube. And now if I re-Dynamesh on this, so just by control-clicking the mask and clearing it off, it's going to punch a hole out right where that cube was. So this is a quick way to kind of subtract detail from your model if you want to carve into the surfaces. And you just need another primitive, and then you just do this subtract function, and it'll carve it right out of your model. So the Boolean process inside of ZBrush using Dynamesh is extremely fast. And it solves a lot of those kind of crazy complex shapes that you may come across, and especially keying in a simple solution. So that's the Dynamesh thing. I got a whole bunch more here I want to kind of get through. I got to make sure I'm... So now we talked about slicing. So let's go back and see here. So here I have part of a plane. Now this once again was created inside of ZBrush as well. If I turn everything on, you can see I have this little kind of plane here. I was planning on having this printed out. It was started to print on the Form 1. We got most of the pieces done, but not quite all of them, so it's not here today for me to kind of show you guys. But this right now, for the build volume of this, it's a little bit too big, and also I may want to cast different parts of this. And so if I want to do some sort of like vacuum molding kind of stuff on it, I wouldn't be able to do this piece as a vacuum mold because it has all these indents on this section, the cockpit, all this other stuff. So I'd want to kind of slice it up to get it broken into these different parts. Now this mesh is Dynameshed already, so you can see it's the tessellation and the density across the entire model is very nice all the way through. So now I just want to cut it up really quick. So there's a brush inside of ZBrush. So I'm going to go to the brush menu and find this brush called Slice Curve. Now, little tangent here, ZBrush has these hotkeys built in it already for controlling all your brushes, and it's done very easily through a few commands. So if you hit B, it brings up the brush palette. If you know what kind of brush you want, so I want the slice brush, I now hit S, which will isolate by the letter S, and then you can come by and see that all these little icons have different letters by them. So the slice curve brush is I. So if I want the slice curve brush, it's B, S, I, and it's going to give me the slice curve brush. If I want to go back to that clay buildup brush, B, C, B, and it's going to give me clay buildup. So it's got this really kind of intuitive way of hotkeying for all your brushes, and you just have to see which brush hotkey is showing up before you actually select it. So if you come in and say, I want the clay buildup, isolate by C, and you see clay buildup is B, you just remember it. Next time you go in there, you can just quickly go through them all. So back to the slice brush, back to clay buildup, and it's all just inside of ZBrush. So you don't have to set any hotkeys for this. All right, so back on tangent with the slice curve option. So the slice brush you use with Control and Shift, and it's going to allow you to draw this little kind of slice functionality here. And what this is going to do is wherever I place this, it's going to generate a polygon loop through the model. So it's actually going to cut the model and generate a form. So if I zoom in here, you can see there should be a precise line going from top to bottom, exactly where that line was formed on the model. And if I'm going to demo this on a little bit less dense mesh here, just to show you this guy a little bit better. So you can see here, just have topology all over the place. I'm just going to slice right through this. And I've got subdivisions quick. Go through those. So I'm going to do a slice right through this to show you guys this kind of structure here. So I'm just going to take this, and you see how that nice clean line, so just slice through the entire thing. Now it also gives me a second polygroup. So think of polygroups as like elements in other programs. So it's part of your model, but it's a separate part of your model. And what these polygroups allow you to do is now I can hit Control and Shift with a select rectangle brush, and I can actually hide part of my mesh very easily. So this is a quick way if you're working on big meshes, you can just slice the arm. It gives you a new polygroup for that entire arm, and then you can just isolate that arm, work on the underneath or at the elbow, all that stuff, and then all your other models still there, and you just hold Control and Shift to bring it all back. So it's a quick way to kind of set up areas or portions of your model for isolation. So back to the plane, I did a slice right through that front there. And so I now have two parts of this model, basically. It's still welded right now, but it's just giving me the ability to kind of see both areas. So I want to kind of break these up into two parts. And I had perspective on when I did my slice. I'm going to go and redo this quick, because I don't want it to be warped. I want it to be nice and straight. So just slice this area here. And when you draw this slice out, you draw it with holding Control and Shift, and then after you have it drawn, you can hold Alt, and you can move the slice around. So if you don't draw it exactly where you want it, you have the ability to kind of move it around, and then once you release, then it'll actually do the process. So it's pretty forgiving on the actual function. And so this is going to give me a new polygroup here and slice the rest of the mesh there. So now you see I've got that nice breakup right there. So now I can isolate this one. So this would be that first part, and then this part would be that second part. So now I have two polygroups. I can now split this up into two different subtools. And this is done through the subtool menu. And down here there's a split and a group split. And this is going to take those two chunks that I just made, those two elements, and just split them out into two different parts. So now I have this part here, and then I have a separate tool that has this part here. Now once you have this generated, we just need to close that hole to make it watertight. And in the Geometry tab, we come down to Modify Topology, and there's a Close Holes. And it's going to go through and just seal that hole right up. So there you go. So now you've just sliced your mesh, and you have the one part already done, sliced with just one brush, gave you the two parts, you split it with a group split, and then you just close the holes. And now you have those two different pieces that are watertight. So I'm going to do the same on this one, go to the Geometry tab, and do a Close Holes, and there I have that part. And so now if I have both of those visible, I'm just going to move this guy out so you can see it. So I now have a nice slice in my model. So now I can send both those pieces to a printer, and then after they're printed, they'll fuse together perfectly. Now we can start talking about key generation. I think that's the next on the list here. So this is the same process. So oftentimes you may not want to, you can have them flush and then they'll go together, but sometimes you want keys just to make sure they don't turn, especially if you have areas on arms or things like that. And the key solution is done exactly the same as this process. So you know how we showed where you can just add an element to a part here? So if I just isolate this part here, I'm going to make a key really quick for this. So I'm just going to go back to that insert brush and get that cube, and then just drag it out here. And I have solo on, which is why it kind of disappeared there. So I generated a key like that. and I can move this now. Anything you generate with this insert mesh brush comes out not unmasked, so you can now move it around freely after you have it drawn. And now I can actually just scale this down a little bit, so I'm just going to mask this part right here, and then just scale this slightly. Oops. I don't have enough topology on that little cube. I have to do it this way. Oh, I do have enough topology. So picture this as a nice flat cube. Ignore my my wonky cube here. ZBrush has the ability for you to make your keys and save them and store them and then reuse them as insert mesh brushes. So you don't have to manually do this every time. If you know you have a set of keys that you want to use all the time, you can store that in a brush, and then you can just apply them to your model extremely quick. So this is going to be a little bit rough here for the key. It's just more to get the idea of the shape of the fitting. And so after I have that generated, I'm now just going to re-dynamesh this to make it into one object. So just hope this resolution is correct. Yep, so that's now fused as one object. You can smooth your key out just a little bit through here. This is just holding down Shift, which gives you a smooth option. So there's that key. So that's good. And now I'm going to go back to my main object, and hopefully I moved this back. Yep, I did. So now I need to subtract this part, which has the key, from this main body that did not have the key on it. So I want to make sure that key fits right here. So when I print them out as two separate parts, they plug in together exactly how they need to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this keyed option here, and I'm just going to duplicate that, because I want to have the one that's going to go, and then the one I want to subtract from this other body, I want to make sure it's a little bit bigger. So you kind of incorporate the shrinkage rate. It's always easier, in my opinion, to add a little clay and stick things together than it is to sand it down. So I'd much rather fill the space with a little bit of material rather than spend time sanding that key down to make sure it fits. So back to the main shape here, and back to this key. Now this is another process of the negative subtract function, or the dynamesh subtract function inside of ZBrush. So here I have the plane here, and as soon as it's saving, and I want to subtract this part from it. So I want to subtract this key from it. So we talked about the size difference. So I'm going to come to deformation and just do an inflate on this, and usually anywhere from like 2 to 5 is usually pretty good. And this is just going to expand that part a little bit more. So it just expanded all the volumes. It's like a push modifier. So it's taking all those vertices and expanding them out. And this is just giving you that offset, that slight offset. So when you do the negative subtract with this option, that other key that hasn't been inflated is going to cut and fit perfectly. So it's just giving you a little bit of kind of leeway to make sure stuff works correctly. So I just inflated this one. And now over here in your subtool, there's this option that just basically it's going to give you the process to do a subtract from the feature. So you just turn the subtract option on. And then with this tool selected, you now just go to merge and do a merge down. And as long as you had that second option checked on your subtool, it's going to give you this white polygroup on your object, which is a subtraction polygroup. So this will become, there's a lot of videos I can show you guys. It's kind of a little bit complex to kind of explain, so I don't really go into too much depth on the actual process of it. But anything that has a white polygroup is going to give you a subtract once you re-dynamesh it. So it's like you can punch holes. So if you take a cylinder, give it a white polygroup, you can stick it in your model, re-dynamesh, it's going to give you a hole wherever that object is. So by assigning this white group, now when I re-dynamesh this part, it's going to subtract this other part out. So to re-dynamesh, it's going to make sure dynamesh is on, and I'm just going to re-dynamesh, and it should now punch this hole right out of this mesh here.